our podcast and also the year of the NDC submission, we will have a super insightful discussions with the experts from the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change or the UNFCCC. Here with us now, I'm honored to welcome our special guest, Miss Julie Amoroso Garbin, and also Miss Juhi Bansal from the UNFCCC. So, hi, Juhi and Julie, how are you doing?
Hello, Indira. Thank you very much for having us here. Doing good, and I hope that we do service to this invitation. Again, thank you so much for ASEAN Center for Energy for inviting us and having us today.
Great, thank you. So, maybe before we started this podcast, could you please give us a brief introduction of yourself and also your role in the UNFCCC so that the audience would know more about it?
Okay, I see that Julie's screen is currently frozen at the moment, so let me go ahead. My name is Julie Amoroso Garbin, and I am the regional lead of one of the six regional collaboration centers of the UNFCCC Secretariat. So I'm leading the Regional Collaboration Center for Asia and the Pacific, and we are based here in Bangkok. So I'm not sure whether Juhi is already here, but over to you, Indira.
All right, thank you very much, Julie, for the kind introduction. Maybe while waiting for Juhi to rejoin to the meeting, let's just start the topic about the climate change. Well,
Mhm.
Julie, actually, climate change is a very multifaceted issue right now, not only in the national but also the international commitment. So maybe could you please let us know and when I learned about the climate change, a lot of terms are coming up, like the UNFCCC, COPs, NDCs, and also Paris Agreement, of course. So in this case, could you please let us know how was the UNFCCC was born?
Thank you very much, Indira. It's actually a very I don't want to start the conversation with saying that it's a complicated topic to comprehend, but maybe let me just say that there's more to I think the terms that you've mentioned. But let me start maybe with providing the backdrop in terms of how the climate negotiations came about. So the prologue to the climate change negotiations and later on to the creation of the UNFCCC begins with the first World Climate Conference sponsored by the World Meteorological Organization, or what we call WMO, which was held in February 1979. It was the first major international scientific gathering that discussed human-induced climate change. And this event led to the creation of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, in 1988, which right now provides the authoritative scientific assessments on climate change. And then climate change as an international agenda rose into prominence at the 1988 Toronto Conference on the Changing Atmosphere, which recommended reducing carbon dioxide emissions by 20% by 2005. So the issue was discussed at the UN General Assembly and then later on in preparatory meetings for the 1992 Earth Summit. And now the UN Climate Change, or the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is the full name of the convention, but we also normally call them now as UN Climate Change, was established at the 1992 Rio Summit, or Rio Earth Summit. And again, it was established to respond to the growing scientific evidence that climate change is real and driven by human activity. The convention, which came into force on the 21st of March 1994, now includes 198 countries or parties, what we call parties. And these are actually countries that have, ratified the convention. So right now we have 197 countries plus the European Union. So In terms of the goal of the UNFCCC or the UN climate change, it is really to prevent the dangerous interference with the climate system in a fair way that considers different national circumstances. For instance, for Asia Pacific, this means supporting development priorities while also addressing rising climate risks such as sea level rise, droughts, and typhoons. So yeah, I think I will pause it there unless you have other follow-up questions.
Thank you, Julie. So since we already have a Miss Juhi get back here, so maybe we can try to let the audience know to shortly brief in our introduce yourself, Juhi.
Thank you very much, Indira. There's no online webinar that happens without technical difficulties. Apologies for that.
Yeah,
I am Juhi
no, that's
Bansa.
fine.
I'm the NDC and LT-led specialist with the UNFCCC Regional Collaboration Center for Asia and the Pacific. So in this big NDC year, we have a big responsibility to try and work with countries and support them in the submission of these big climate plans. Thank you for having us here.
All right, thank you, Juhi. So right now we just had this discussion on the historical, like the histories of how the UNFCCC was born. But I think just to clear things up, what is exactly the responsibilities of the UNFCCC or UN climate change in terms of the international climate commitments or coordinations?
Thank you again. Maybe that's also a question that I can respond to, Indira. As the Secretariat to the Convention, the UNFCCC Secretariat plays a central facilitative role in supporting the international climate regime or the international discourse or intergovernmental process on climate change. Um, its core um, its core responsibilities relate to supporting parties, or what we call, again, these are the countries that have signified to be part of the convention, operationalizing global commitments and ensuring transparency, coherence, and progress under the Paris Agreement and the broader convention. So we have many, I would say, responsibilities. So one is in terms of supporting intergovernmental negotiations, which is for some of you who are very familiar with the UNFCCC process, you know that we do have two meetings a year. One would be the subsidiary bodies and then the conference of parties, which usually takes place at the end of the year. So part of the role in supporting the international negotiation also includes preparing official documents, technical papers, and briefing materials to facilitate the negotiation. And then we also provide legal and procedural and logistic support to parties as they, as they take part in the negotiation process, as they adopt decisions and agreements and rule books. We also have a role of tracking and supporting implementation of the different, I would say, processes established under the convention. One is in terms of the progress on the nationally determined contributions, or what we call the NDCs, on the long-term low emission development strategies, or what we call the LT-LEDs, on on the progress on the national adaptation plans, or what we call the NAPs, on the submissions or preparation of the biennial transparency reports under the enhanced transparency framework. So the Secretariat manages the reporting systems and reviews of national submissions to ensure transparency, consistency, and accountability. We also have we do host a lot of mechanisms as well under the secretariat. So, and most of these are related to facilitating access to climate finance, technology, and capacity building. So, for instance, the secretariat also hosts and support the financial mechanism entities, including the Green Climate Fund, Global Environmental Facility. The reporting of these facilities or the financial mechanisms to the COP, the technology mechanism, and then also the Paris Committee on Capacity Building. And then, of course, the Secretariat also has a role in terms of supporting countries or providing that capacity building support to countries on how they could access resources and then also acquire the necessary skill sets and knowledge to strengthen their institutional capacity, and be able to respond to the different, I would say, activities under the convention and the Paris Agreement. So there are many, I would say, many things that the Secretariat are currently doing, but I would like to emphasize that the Secretariat is not a policy-making body itself, but rather a facilitator. It's a convener and a custodian of the international climate process, and that it ensures that parties are supported, that rules and commitments are clear and tracked, and that progress is transparent and inclusive.
Well, I think this is the right time to say that your job is such a complicated and also a long-term job. Well, I guess so. So I'm curious, with nearly almost 200 parties under this secretariat, how do you maintain or coordinate with all the parties? Is there any dedicated bodies or working groups or even instruments to collect all parties' updates?
Yeah, so with the 197 parties to the convention, including the Paris Agreement, as mentioned earlier, of course, coordination happens at different levels. So the UNFCCC Secretariat coordinates through a structured and inclusive system of governing bodies, subsidiary bodies, and dedicated expert groups and mandated reporting instruments. So there are, I can name many of these governing bodies, but I would say that at the top we have the COP or this and the CMA. And again, for those that are tuning in this conversation for the first time, the COP means Conference of Parties, and the CMA is oh my God. So CMA is Conference of the Parties
Is it for the Kyoto
for the Paris
Protocol?
for the
For
Paris
the
Agreement,
for Paris
actually.
Agreement, okay.
So I failed I think if anyone is listening to, if any of my bosses is listening to this conversation, I failed the test on the what do you call this, the acronyms.
The
So
abbreviations, yeah.
yes, exactly. So the COP oversees the implementation of the convention itself. The CMA governs the Paris Agreement, and the CMP is the one who's overseeing the implementation of the Kyoto Protocol. And as you know, the Conference of Parties is the meeting where all parties meet annually to negotiate decisions and adopt rules. And the decisions are made by consensus, and so giving every party equal weight on any decision or agenda item. And then we have the subsidiary bodies. These are we have two. One is on the what we call the subsidiary body for implementation, which has the mandate of reviewing how parties are implementing commitments, and it provides guidance on the financial, technical, and capacity building support. And then and then another one is SUBSTA, what we call SUBSTA, the subsidiary body for scientific and technological advice. So it advises on the scientific, technical, and methodological matters. Now, apart from these what we call governing and subsidiary bodies, we also have dedicated technical and expert bodies created by the parties within the convention itself. And these are created or established to coordinate and to coordinate specialized work and engage with parties continuously. So, for instance, we have the technical dialogues, the global stack take, for instance, we have a Paris Committee on capacity building. We have constituted bodies like the least developed countries expert group, who takes care of the any matters relating to least developed countries. And then we have the adaptation committee, which talks about the different matters on adaptation, which also includes monitoring and ensuring policy coherence across the intergovernmental process on adaptation. And then we have the Standing Committee on Finance, the Technology Executive Committee, and then the Katowice Committee on Impacts, which deals with response measures. I mean, these are many of the. I may have missed, some constituted body, but these are just examples that I can name at the moment. But also integral to the UNFCCC Secretariat is the UNFCCC Regional Collaboration Center, which support climate action worldwide by helping countries implement the Paris Agreement. And so the RCCs, again, I mentioned earlier that we have 6 regional collaboration centers across the globe, and they serve as the regional presence of the UNFCCC Secretariat. And they deliver technical assistance, they provide capacity building support to countries in the region, they foster and strengthen partnerships with the different regional partners to ensure that we meet the national and local climate action needs in the region.
All right. So, Julie, just a follow-up question. Since you mentioned earlier, like there are a lot of subsidiary bodies and a lot of different, how to say, department under the UNFCCC. So, are they have their own responsibilities to directly contact with the national government or ministries on each country, or how it's going?
So there are, just to be clear, there are 2 subsidiary bodies, which is the SABSA and the SVI, and this is also the body that convenes the meeting twice a year. So this is formed by parties as well. For every meeting, these are the parties that are going into the different contact groups or negotiating rooms. But there are also constituted bodies that takes care of very specific concerns within the structure of the convention. And most of these constituted bodies are supported also by the secretariat.
Uh,
So the interface, I would say, is still within the secretariat. So for instance, I am coming from the Regional Collaboration Center, from the secretariat. So we can get in touch with the governments in our region and have a conversation with them in terms of their progress on climate action. What are the challenges, what bottlenecks, what are their support needs, for instance. And then we serve as the conduit, I would say, of the secretariat, to inform to bring back this information to the intergovernmental process, either through the different reports being prepared by the secretariat or by having conversations with our colleagues supporting the different constituted bodies. Another channel is that by having conversation with the regional partners, that's also a way where we can communicate this different support needs that countries have conveyed to us. So I don't know whether I provided you a picture, but yeah.
If I may add
Yes.
something just quickly here. So
Yes,
just
please.
in terms of coordination with the countries, each country party designates a national focal point, which we call the NFPs, and they serve as the official contact point with the Secretariat. And then we, at the Secretariat level and at the regional collaboration centers, maintain direct communication with these focal points, and we gather inputs, but we also provide support, and we coordinate the participation of these focal points at the different events like the SPs and which are happening right now, actually. I do want to warn all the listeners that there are a lot of acronyms that we use. I know that's very, like, a lot of jargon and it's very difficult, but we'll hopefully try and break it down as we go along.
Yeah, that's true. And one of the jargon that actually is the title of this podcast also is the NDC. And it stands for the Nationally Determined Contributions, which also Julie and Juhi mentioned earlier, like frequently. And I think before we jump in like into the NDC and its technical and also its coordination line, maybe could you please let us know what exactly is the NDC and how is it related to Paris Agreement?
Thanks for that, Indira. I'll take this one. So on this, the NDCs are, just in simpler terms, they're national climate plans. And this is what countries submit under the Paris Agreement. And they basically detail the following. The first is that they look at how country plans to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, or what we refer to as GHG emissions. Secondly, they look at how the countries plan to adapt to the impacts of climate change. And thirdly, they try to put out what support the country would need in terms of means of implementation, which includes finance, technology, and capacity building. This is, of course, for developing countries or the LDCs, but also in terms of the developed countries, they may actually lay out what support they may provide to other countries. So there's a section within them where they may provide this information. And basically, each NDC reflects a country's national priorities, its capabilities, and its national circumstances. And they're meant to evolve over time and increase ambition over time. So in terms of how it links to the Paris Agreement overall, because Julie gave a bigger picture of how the different work streams of the Paris Agreement actually interact, the Paris Agreement, which was adopted in 2015, has three basic main term goals. The first is to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius and pursue efforts to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And the second is to enhance adaptive capacity and resilience to climate impacts. And the third is to make finance flows consistent with low emissions, climate resilient development. And at the core of this Paris Agreement is the NDCs. They are the primary vehicle through which countries operationalize their commitments and contributions to these high-level goals that have to be achieved globally. So without ambitious and implemented NDCs, the global temperature goals cannot and will not be met. And that's why the NDCs are a bridge between global ambition and national action. The NDC cycle itself is built on a ratchet mechanism. That's how we refer to it. And this means that it happens over time and progresses as countries submit new NDCs. Under this, basically, every country will submit NDCs every 5 years. 2025 is the third time this is happening. So it's very interesting for us. Under this, also, every country must progressively increase ambition, which means that every NDC must be a progression beyond its last. So based on what the last NDC was that the country submitted, the next NDC must be a small progression based on countries' national circumstances. And lastly, they also must participate in global stocktakes, which happen every 5 years. And this is where countries all gather together to assess collective progress that has been made. Now, the first round of NDCs, as I said, this is the third. So the first round was submitted around 2015, 2016, when the Paris Agreement was adopted. The second round was due by 2020, 2021. And the third round of NDCs is due this year. Of course, some countries have already submitted this year, and others will continue to submit throughout this year. I hope that's clear, Indira. Back to you.
All right. I think the one interesting point that I could take, especially from the website, is the ratchet mechanism. I think do you have like any inspiration from where the ratchet mechanism is coming from? Because I read online that the ratchet is actually a tool which only can move one way, so there is no like coming back into it. So is that true?
Yeah, so this is what I was trying to say, that the ratchet mechanism understands that these long-term goals of 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees Celsius warming will not be met immediately, right? Like today, where the countries start based on the current means of implementation and access that countries have to finance and capacity building and technology is limited. But this also builds upon the fact that over time, this will get better. So countries must evolve based on their national circumstances in terms of their progression. That's why it's a one-way street, that where you start at point X today, tomorrow should be X plus 1 or X plus 2 based on your national circumstances, based on the support you can access internationally. And this is where also all the support providers come in, the UNFCCC and other bodies, to try and support countries in building in this ratchet mechanism as we evolve. This is why it builds in we show it as a spiral that builds up, because it starts small, but this action collectively builds together to achieve the long-term goals.
Wow, that's amazing. So since you have explained about the NDC in a general way, maybe could you please let us know how is the submission process? Because I think for the audience, maybe who just tuning into this climate document related information, they must have been curious about how is the process of the submission, especially when you coordinate with the country, which is not small, but like the whole country. So could you please enlighten us?
Thank you for your question, Indira. I think the most important thing here to remember is they're nationally determined contributions. So the process of the NDC, first and foremost, is a nationally determined process. It's based on national circumstances. And from a procedural point of view, the NDC submission first happens at a national stage, which is a nationally driven exercise. And the second half of that is the international coordinated steps, which has some structured and defined roles. So at the national level, I think each country develops its NDC through a multi-step, multi-stakeholder coordination process. As you said, it's countrywide. So it starts from, local governance levels, goes through subnational processes, and evolves to this national level country document that is informed by all levels of governance. And it is often that we see it's often led by the ministries of environment or climate change or natural resources. And the key steps that we observe in common is that the first thing that countries try to do is policy alignment, which ensures that the NDC aligns with national development goals and priorities, as well as with long-term low emission strategies. So if a country has a net zero goal, how will it get there is determined by different NDCs in progression. Second, importantly, and very crucially, is the stage of stakeholder consultation. This is where your developing line ministry, which is Ministry of Environment, will usually involve other line ministries such as energy, transport, agriculture, industry, your main line ministries that actually implement those goals or collect data on these different sectors, but also non-governmental entities like civil society, the private sector, subnational governments, and groups like indigenous peoples are involved in these stakeholder consultations because indeed the NDC process affects everybody. So a truly inclusive NDC is usually good for the country and is based on national circumstances. One of the key steps that informs some of this more scientific basis of the NDC is the technical assessments. So since a country's NDC must have targets on what GHG emissions are to be reduced, it must first do the baseline assessment. It must build a GHG inventory of where the emissions lie, must do scenario modeling to predict what will happen in the future, and then be able to set targets that I can reduce emissions by this amount by this year. So they have to do that forecasting, they have to do that modeling. And in doing so, they also have to do cost benefit and mitigation potential analyses to see what fits the national circumstance of the country, where they will be able to access low-hanging fruits, where they have technologies available, where they would need support. So all of that has to be done. And that leads us into the finance and implementation planning, where the countries should look into the costing, the accounting, define their own financing needs, identify sources that can happen, that can unlock finance at the national level. And in this, of course, we must mention that including adaptation, loss and damage, and co-benefits such as sustainable development goals is very useful because it helps see where the finance is coming through for unlocking some of these larger developmental priorities. Lastly, which I think needs to be underscored, is that the NDCs do need high-level political endorsement because they are a national plan. So before final submission, the NDCs often have to be approved by the cabinet or interministerial committees, and that often takes some time, but it has to be country-owned and country-driven. On the second part, which is the submission to the Secretariat, once the NDC is finalized and endorsed, there are a few procedural steps. The government submits the NDC through its national focal point to the UNFCCC NDC registry, and the NDC must include mitigation targets, optionally adaptation targets, but information on timeframes and scopes, on assumptions and methodologies, support needs for developing countries, and it must address how the NDC is fair and ambitious. So these information have to be included, but the interesting part is that the submission is voluntary in its format. So there's no prescribed template for the NDC, but it must be clear, transparent, and understandable, and must follow the ICTU, what we call the Information on Clear, Transparent, and Understandable Reporting, which is a guiding principle in the Paris Agreement that must be followed. I'll start
Alright, so
I made it more complicated, but this is the process.
So may I confirm if the role of the NDC here is to bridge between the global ambition and the national action for each country in terms of their climate ambition? Is
Absolutely.
that right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so the NDC holds the central role to bridge the international and then to break it down into more national ambition based on their national priorities, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Great to know that. But I think and as far as I know, NDC is not a yearly submitted document. And it needs each country each parties should update the NDC every 5 years. And this year would be the submission of the third version of the NDC. So maybe could you, before we jump into this whole of supporting documents, maybe can you start with why is it all should be 5 years?
So this is a process that's been established under the Conference of Parties. As we said, this is a party-driven process. So it has been established as such on the whole by parties together. But on the whole, the process makes sense because at the same time, you're also having the global stocktake that happens every 5 years. The first global stocktake was concluded at COP28 in Dubai. So that happened 2 years before the submission of this NDC. And meanwhile, the enhanced transparency mechanism also kicked in 2024. The BTRs were to be submitted for the first time. So that's, for example, I think Julie will go into it more, but it's just that it's a whole process together, and the other ancillary documents come in to show you how the Paris Agreement works in its entirety. And that's the ambition cycle. So the first NDCs were submitted in 2015, 2016. As I said, the second cycle came through in 2020, 2021. And then in 2023, we had the first global stocktake where together we saw that this is the progress we've made. This is where gaps still lie. This is where our world needs to move together. So now when this new NDC is being prepared, it's taking into account what happened before, where we still lag behind. And at the same time, the BTRs, which are the biennial transparency reports, they did a tracking and progress of how the NDCs have actually progressed. So that's where countries are accounting as to how well they've done in their own target setting and where they can move forward. So it's a real-time accounting of what's happening. So it works together in a cycle as a whole. Julie, I wonder if you want to add something to this. I'll stop here.
Do you have any? Yeah, Julie, do you have any more
No, in fact,
comments?
I don't want. I think I will spare that additional input, because later on when we talk about the different documents, that would also allude to how the whole climate ambition is actually going into, I would say, into operations. Because again, NDC is one part of the broader, structure that we do have under the Paris Agreement.
Yes, now that you mentioned, as NDC is not the only document that matters in terms of the international climate cooperation. So maybe could you please let us know, is there any related documents prior to this NDC submission so that the UNFCCC, especially the RCC Asia Pacific, could track or monitor the progress, or how do you do it usually?
Yeah, thanks very much, Indira. Juhi had already given us a full picture of the whole NDC cycle, what the NDC is about, and also she alluded to the whole Paris ambition cycle. So you would know now that NDCs are just one part of a broader suite of documents that parties must prepare and submit under the Convention and the Paris Agreement. And the together these reports form the backbone of the international climate transparency and accountability system. So apart from the NDCs, we also have what we call the biennial transparency reports, or what we call the BTRs. And these, as Julie has mentioned earlier, they are the core reporting, I would say, instrument under the enhanced transparency framework of the Paris Agreement. And the information that are included in the BTRs are the information on the greenhouse gas emissions, or what we call the GHG inventory, the implementation of the NDCs, so the progress on the implementation of the NDCs, the information on adaptation actions, and information on the support received and communicated or needed by the developing countries. For the developed countries, or what we call, for the developed countries, the information that they include in the BTRs also include the support that they provided to other developing countries. So we also have the national inventory reports, and this contain the detailed GHG emissions data by sources, emissions data by sources and removals by sync using IPCC methodologies. And these are Annex 1 parties, or what we call the developed country parties, are required to communicate the NIRs annually, while the non-Annex 1 parties, or the developing countries, are to communicate these NIRs through their BTRs with flexibility. And then we also have the national adaptation plans, although this has been established way before the Paris Agreement because this was established in 2010. These are medium to long-term plans that identify and addresses the adaptation priorities of the country. And these are also country-driven. Um, as I would say, as part of the outcomes of the first global stocktake that took place in at COP28, countries are also now expected to put in place their national adaptation plans. And then another key document that I would say is part of the whole structure would be the long-term low emission development strategies, or what we call the LT-LEDs, or some refer to it as LTS. So these are also strategies outlining how countries plan to decarbonize by mid-century. These are also voluntary, but of course, countries are encouraged to prepare their LTS to align short-term action towards their NDCs with long-term goals towards net zero and the 1.5 degrees Celsius pathways. And then countries are also preparing what we call adaptation communications. And again, these are communications detailing priorities, action needs, and support. And countries has actually the flexibility to either use their NDCs as their adaptation communication, or their national adaptation plan as their adaptation communication, or otherwise a standalone document that that they would label as adaptation communication. These are this also provides information on adaptation support they provide for developed countries. While for developing countries, this can also outline the support needs for adaptation for implementing their adaptation priorities. Um, so I know that, one of the questions that may come out from a national representative or a practitioner would be, why do we have so many of these instruments? Why do we have so many documents that are needed? I would say that they are not separate. They're not separate entities on its own. As we mentioned, these are all parts and pieces of the whole structure of the convention and also of the Paris Agreement, and they all fit together because they're also interconnected. So, for instance, when you do have an NDC, when parties or countries submit their NDC, they they do have an articulation of their ambition on adaptation, for instance. And that's okay, because if they wanted to include the goals or commitment for adaptation, they can put that in their NDC. But I would say the operational details, so when it comes to the planning and implementation of these adaptation goals, would also be found in the National Adaptation Plan, because the NAPS remains to be the central vehicle for adaptation planning and implementation. And they provide more details in terms of the vulnerabilities, the assessments done, how they have prioritized their adaptation measures, etc. And then the BTRs and the GHG inventories, again, they track progress of the commitments that have been included in the NDC. So these are, I would say, the reporting mechanism. If your NDC is your planning, your climate action plans, your BTRs and GHG inventories are your reporting tables or reporting instruments. And then the LTS or the LT-LEDs guides the overall sort of long-term alignment for your climate action at the national level. Yeah, I think those are the different or various instruments under the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. I may have missed some information, but I would say that these are all the ones that apply at least to all parties.
Well, now that's a lot of things to do, of course. So maybe since 2025 is the year of the NDC submission for the parties, so could you as the UNFCCC from RCC Asia Pacific, maybe could you please update us on the status of the NDC submissions in Asia region or specific in Southeast Asia? Because maybe there should be like regional trends or specific highlights that should be noted.
Thanks, Indira. So just on this, of course, we work in Asia Pacific, and based on this region, since 2016, 47 Asia Pacific countries submitted their initial NDCs, which was the INDCs. By COP26, which was in 2021, 38 of these had submitted updates, and 8 of them even submitted second updates in 2021 to 2022. So it's quite a dynamic region for us. This year, as of date, only 6 countries from the region, which is basically New Zealand, Singapore, Marshall Islands, Japan, Maldives, and Nepal, have submitted their NDC 3.0, but we are expecting a majority of the submissions to come through by end of Q3, which is in September, by when the synthesis report will be prepared. And we see while many parties have enhanced ambition, unfortunately, the aggregate NDC targets, they remain insufficient to align with 1.5-degree pathways. So more work does need to be done. And this region is critical to achieving the global goals. Just specifically on ASEAN regional trends and highlights, we see that all 10 ASEAN countries, of course, have signed and ratified the Paris Agreement. They've all submitted their NDCs in the last cycle, but only Singapore in these countries has submitted their NDC 3.0 so far. And their progress is evident in terms of submission cycles, in terms of sectoral expansion, in terms of increasing ambition, and increased integration of long-term climate goals. So there's increasing alignment in terms of that. We see that most of them have enhanced clarity, transparency, and coverage. Most ASEAN countries have improved the transparency and structure of their NDCs using the common tabular formats that Julie was alluding to under the enhanced transparency framework. Most of them are using IPCC-aligned methodologies increasingly. The NDCs now cover more sectors, including agriculture, forestry, and other land use, waste, as well as industrial processes, not just a focus on energy. So it's very heartening to see expansion of sectors. We also see a shift towards absolute targets and emission ceilings. And it's a really improvement over their previous targets, that countries are increasingly moving from percentage-based reductions to absolute emission limits or emissions peaking trajectories. And this is improving the comparability and tracking. And some of the NDC 3.0 include 2035 emission ceiling and broadened sectoral scope. And this is what we're hearing from countries that are yet to submit as well. We see greater NDC and LTS alignment, that more and more ASEAN countries are aligning their updated NDCs with long-term low-emission development strategies and are reinforcing their net zero ambitions by 2050 or 2060 based on their own commitments. But it's nice to see that there is more alignment. Increasingly, there is greater reliance on GHG modeling and scenario analysis to inform the target. So it's scientific, evidence-based data, and more data and modeling is being used, which is also very positive. Increasingly, and this is something I do want to flag given our audience here today, that there is more social inclusion and just transition aspects included in the NDCs. And the recent NDCs, they place greater emphasis on gender equality, youth engagement, and just transition principles, which is a very positive sign. Now, moving to the less positive things, which is the challenges and gaps. I think the biggest one in the region does remain to be financial mobilization. And we see that there's a persistent need for grant-based and concessional finance, especially for adaptation, which is difficult to unlock in the region. Again, we do see a lot of capacity and data gaps, where technical capacity and data availability are quite uneven across ASEAN, where some countries are progressing much faster and some remain lagging behind. In terms of tracking and implementation, we see that MRV and monitoring and evaluation systems remain underdeveloped in several countries. And I think one thing which has been quite prominent in countries expressing their desire is private sector engagement, but this is still limited in many national plans. Although we see heightened interest in carbon markets and ESG financing, this is rising, but not all countries are equipped yet to engage with these mechanisms. In terms of opportunities, I think the biggest one that we see also as the RCC is regional collaboration. So we've seen that mechanisms like the ASEAN Working Group on Climate Change, which is the AWGCC, the ASEAN Taxonomy for Sustainable Finance, they become very popular, and it's helping the ASEAN countries come together and collaborate for common goals. It's also useful to see them promoting cross-border initiatives For example, on renewable energy, they have the ASEAN Power Grid. They're looking at carbon markets and increasingly building collaborations in this. And most importantly, what we see is fostering peer learning, looking at technical capacity exchanges and holistic and inclusive planning. We're seeing support increasingly be provided by partners. So of course, with the RCC, we are working with UNDP, NDC partnership, UNEP, and of course the regional commission ASCAP, which is very active in providing this as well. So it's heartening to see that there is it is a very dynamic region and movement is happening fast in this region. Thanks.
Yeah, I think this is the perfect time to say that we have to see the beauty in the complexity of the NDC and also international climate cooperation. And I think, before I jump into another question, I would like to remind our audience here that we also provide the question box below this Zoom. So if you have any questions, just type your question and then we will discuss it more. And since I checked the question box, maybe I can take some questions from there and just take it to the stage. So one question from Agung, I could say, given the complexity of the policy implementation in emerging economies like Indonesia, what strategies have proven the effective to bridge the gap between the NDC ambitions and on-the-ground execution, or maybe the implementation?
And Julie, would you like to answer that first, or should I go ahead?
No, please go ahead, Julie.
Thanks. So it is indeed, a very useful question, but also a complex question. I don't think there's one strategy that helps because in economies like Indonesia or Malaysia, these are big countries. And to truly implement NDCs, there are targets across all sectors. You have energy, you have transport, AFOLU, IPPU, you have different priorities looking at vulnerable sections and adaptation. So I think most importantly, what we're seeing as a good strategy is number one, looking at it holistically in terms of planning, making sure that policies are informed from ground up. So evidence-based policy making is really important. Here we ensure that data is collected from ground up. So involvement of local and municipal authorities is really important. Subnational action, therefore, is key. But in terms of the national level target setting, I think policies that speak to all the line departments are really important. So for example, if an NDC target is being set, it's really important to ensure that the energy ministry or the forestry ministry is involved. And therefore, you're able to then look at policies in a more holistic fashion. You look at it not just as a policy that will help you reduce emissions by, say, 5%, but also looking at creation of jobs, also ensuring that there's just transition elements involved, also looking at maybe integration of gender components or youth put into those policies. So I would just say cross-sectoral holistic policy making is probably a key strategy, and ensuring that all of these things are based on national, data and realities, and ensuring that these are costed and financed, because otherwise the action won't happen on the ground. But it is a complex question. I don't have a magic answer to this.
It's a good news to, Julie, please.
No, maybe just a few additional points on this question is that I think we should embrace NDC as part of our development agenda. It should not be treated as a separate plan or agenda to be implemented. Like for instance, when we talk about implementation of your energy roadmap, for instance, if you do have a clear energy roadmap, this if your NDC is actually done in a way where it as Julie was saying, it's a whole of government, whole of society approach, then when you implement your energy roadmap, you should ideally be already implementing the the commitments that you have included in your NDCs. So it shouldn't be treated as again separate program. These are all interconnected and should be treated as part of your development agenda.
And if I may quickly add to this, Adira, so sorry. I think this is also where, for example, involving ministries like ministries of finance and planning ministries is really important, because they have an overview beyond just the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. So this is where, for example, long-term strategies play a key goal that bring together different, priorities and different sectors. So I fully agree with Julie here that there has to be a broader mindset shift in governance practices and really deliver impactful policy on the ground.
Yes, I also agree with both of you, and it's a good news to hear that Juhi mentioned that now the climate cooperation and also the mitigation and adaptation also considered a just and inclusive by adding more social and inclusivity within the cooperation itself. And I think it is also aligned with what we call the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation, or APAEC, with our newly endorsed theme by adding a just and inclusive energy transition. So I think a just and inclusive environment should be encouraged more, not only in the energy sector, but also aligning with the climate sector. So maybe because we're talking about the regional view of climate, and we as the ASEAN Center for Energy is a regional think tank who also coordinate with countries in the energy sector. Could you please tell us what kind of technical assistance or capacity building or support that could be provided by us or by your institution to help the countries to develop their climate commitments?
Thanks very much, Indira. And I know that we are running out of time and we can go on and speak about this for lengthily. But let me go straight to that question. I think, as I mentioned, through the Regional Collaboration Center, we provide technical assistance and capacity building support to countries in the region. And the RCC Asia Pacific, we serve as a bridge between the Secretariat and the ASEAN bodies. And we connect the ASEAN governments with technical partners, of course, like ACE. Core, I would say the core work that we do here is we do a regular data gathering and intelligence gathering on the support being provided in the region. And then we facilitate joint capacity building initiatives or efforts with partners like ACE on cross-sectoral policy alignment, integrating climate targets in national and regional development plans, unlocking finance and accessing means of implementation, strengthening stakeholder engagement and inclusivity, which Julie has also mentioned earlier. We also assist in terms of knowledge creation and dissemination, including through publications, reports, and newsletters. For some of you who has not yet subscribed to the newsletter of the RCC Asia Pacific, we do have a lot of resources that we share through that channel. So, for instance, there'll be an upcoming new publication from our side which talks about the what mitigation ambition means for the Pacific. And this is again the one of the work that we're doing. So hopefully we can also do a publication with ASEAN Center for Energy, and we can talk about the different profiles or status of the countries in the region when it comes to energy transition or the just and equitable transition that you have mentioned, Indira. And then finally, we provide targeted technical support to countries in the region upon their request. So, for instance, with Thailand, when they engage with their first ITMOs, or what we call the International Transfer of Mitigation Outcomes, we conducted a dedicated clinic with Thailand to understand how the corresponding adjustments will be done through in their NDCs, for instance, how the reporting will be done with this ITMOs. So that's I think that's one of the examples that I can mention at the moment. And again, noting that we are running out of time, I will pause it there, but I would encourage everyone to reach out to us. And we do have our website, and again, our newsletter is also we produce it regularly, and we provide information on the different events and even resources that are being provided to the region. Yeah. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Julie, for your comprehensive information. And I would also like to remind the audience that please subscribe to the newsletter, and all information that my team has sent this, if I'm not mistaken, to subscribe to your newsletter. And I think since we are running out of time, maybe one closing question from me is, since our listeners is coming from the government, academician, researchers, and also public and even youth society, how can they engage more meaningfully in supporting these climate commitments within the countries?
Again, I have a long answer to this one, but I do note that we just have 5 minutes into this call. But there are many entry points I could say, and maybe Juhi later you can also jump in here. But let me just focus on two items. Maybe in terms of the government, we already mentioned that. It's very important that there's I would say, a high level endorsement of the different, not only of the NDCs, but actually of the different climate action that's taking place at the national level, right? So the governments are encouraged, it's not even encouraged, need to convene, coordinate, and empower various stakeholders by leading national efforts, creating enabling environments, and institutionalizing inclusive participation. Julie mentioned earlier that the NDC should be multi-stakeholder, and the government should set up coordination platforms for or NDC committees that formally include academic institutions, civil society organizations, private sector, and the youth. And then, of course, looking at supporting decentralization of action, because we know that even though the NDCs are nationally determined contributions, we know that the implementation of these commitments happens really on the ground. So it's very important that we empower provinces, the subnational government, cities, local agencies with capacity and again resources, including budgets that are aligned to the NDC goals. Um, and again, I think like these are already mentioned earlier as well, the need for improving data access, because oftentimes when we do the consultations and even data gathering for the NDCs, it stops at the national level, but in fact it has to be ground up, as Juhi mentioned earlier. So the information has to be coming from the ground, but also information should be accessible as well. So if the governments could really enable the having it publicly available, including, yeah, the emissions, and the adaptation priorities, also the different exposure data, it would be very important when you do your NDC, your National Adaptation Plan, etc. So I mean, Juhi, please do come in here. If there are any additional points that you can also add. But of course, other members of the society has very critical role to play here. The civil society organizations, youth networks, for instance. We here at the Asia Pacific, the RCC Asia Pacific, we're a big advocate of the role of the youth in terms of the policy making processes. We do not just acknowledge the youth as mere beneficiaries of these processes, but as really, as co-implementers and even co-creators of solutions at the national and subnational and local level. So we have different programs where we enhance the capacity of the youth to be part of this different climate policy making process. So yes, over to you, Indira.
So, Juhi, do you have any additional points?
No, I think just the underscoring point is that an NDC is a large umbrella document that affects everyone in a country. So it is critical that it has a whole of economy, whole of society approach. And therefore, I feel the NDC, while being developed, has to involve all sectors and all levels of governance of society, including the non-party stakeholders, but also in terms of implementation. And it has to be that kind of cyclical process because this happens every 5 years. So I feel like it can't be, a tick mark exercise that, oh, we've had one stakeholder consultation at the beginning or one at the end. I feel like it has to be an ongoing embedded process in governance systems. So governments, we're hearing increasingly, are looking to engage with stakeholders at multiple steps of the process and in a regular fashion. And similarly, I feel like there is a kind of duty on different stakeholders to ensure that they are spreading awareness, sharing information that they have gathered, and actively playing that role in these governance processes. So I think it's just, yeah, I think it has to be a cyclical, regular process where both these parts of society engage with each other and share more and more information on this, so that it becomes a more regularized process. And those are the best NDCs, because they will be implemented on the ground. They will be country owned. They will be people owned, because there is no implementation if the people are not involved. So that's where I would stop. Thanks.
Yes, I can highlight that this climate cooperation globally is not only highlighting a top-down approach, but also bottom-up. So all matters, all sectors could gather up together and contribute with its portion on climate action. So I think on that note, we've reached the end of today's episode. Thank you once again, Julia and Juhi, for this super insightful session of NDCs. I'm sure that the audience will also be very enlightened by your information. And I think for further information or further updates regarding NDC and also their supporting documents is available on your website as well. Yeah, so if you guys want to know about more about the NDC and also how the UNFCCC works under this climate cooperation, please visit their website. Meanwhile, us, the ASEAN Center for Energy, also provide the intersection between the energy and climate in Southeast Asia. So I guess until next time, let's continue working together towards a more resilient and a low carbon future. I'm Indira signing off. See you in the next episode. Bye bye.